Okay, so today we're going to go over the brain in detail a bit. So we're going to start with the limbic system. And I know that you read about this yesterday, but we're going to go through it again. The limbic system is the part of the brain that is associated with behavioral responses and also our emotional responses. It's one of the most primitive parts of our brain because it's one of the oldest parts of our brain. And that's why it's connected to our survival. So when we talk about fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, this is the part of the brain that is most closely connected with that. But without the limbic part of the brain, we couldn't function because we do need to have these survival instincts. It regulates things like mood, hunger, and sex drive. So, when the brain detects stress in your environment, it sends a message to the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal or HPA axis. As a result, hormones are released to the body as messengers that danger is detected. Cortisol is one of these messenger hormones, which helps the brain think clearly. It increases heart rate and breathing and sends energy to your muscles. Another brain structure involved in the stress response is called the amygdala, located in the middle of the brain, in the limbic system. The amygdala is the brain structure that detects stress and tells the HPA axis to respond. It can detect both emotional and biological stressors. An emotional stressor is something in the environment that may cause you to feel scared, sad, or frustrated. A biological stressor is internal stress felt by the body because of an injury or an illness. These functions of the amygdala are extremely important for survival. If you could not detect things that are harmful, like a bear chasing you, for example, you would not survive, obviously. The amygdala is connected with another part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. The prefrontal cortex is a big region in the front of the brain, and it's basically the control center of our brains because it helps to control our thoughts and actions. The main job of the prefrontal cortex is to control our emotional responses to stress so that we do not get too stressed out. The amygdala and the prefrontal cortex work together to regulate our stress. The amygdala quickly signals a threat or stress in the environment, and the prefrontal cortex helps the amygdala to see stressful events as a little less scary or frustrating. It's important to be able to use the brain to help slow the production of cortisol in the HPA axis uh, because like in a non-life threatening situation, much like what we experience in relationship stress, this process helps us calm down by perceiving the situation as non-life threatening. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about the amygdala. We know it's responsible for coping with fear and danger, and it works really hard to scan the environment for these potential threats. And when it detects something like that, it prepares the body to respond. And that's again where that fight and flight, fawn and freeze comes from. It triggers the body to respond that way. Um, it's likely responsible also for when people feel scared in certain situations, maybe in having claustrophobia or afraid of snakes or spiders or heights. The brain wants to protect us from life threatening conditions, and this is what the amygdala is there for. So, when it assumes something is dangerous or if something dangerous could occur, it is going to trigger this sense of fear. The hippocampus helps with memory and emotional processing, and it will form associations. So, if you have ever smelled a certain food that reminded you of what your grandma cooked, or I know there's a certain perfume that reminds me of my aunt. So, or you might associate a song with someone that you know or a time in your life. So, the hippocampus is responsible for these associations. It's constantly involved in learning and integrating new information. We have millions of associations in this part of the brain that we unconsciously pair together. The thalamus and the hypothalamus act as critical communicators within the brain. So they'll receive and transfer informationally, and they tell the rest of the body what is going to happen next or what the body should be doing next. This is also part of the brain that's responsible for being alert and for sleep. So now you're probably wondering, okay, how does this all factor into being involved with someone that has a personality disorder and experiencing a trauma in relationships? So, for example, the amygdala, if you've been in a relationship that was abusive, emotionally abusive, maybe been with a narcissist or someone in your family, a parent is a narcissist, your amygdala may have interpreted this dynamic as frightening and signals to your body that it is frightening. And so, as a result, your amygdala is going to be hyperactive when interacting with others in the future. And this is why sometimes we repeat these patterns of behavior. The hippocampus is making those associations, and so one of the associations that the hippocampus might be making is if you've been in a love relationship that's been toxic, then the association is going to be that love must include yelling and toxic behavior and conflict. And then as you go out and you pursue potentially other relationships in the future, you're going to assume that this is how it's supposed to be. These associations that have happened to you in the past that your brain has associated with these past relationships, it's going to feel so factual to your brain that your brain is going to tell you to look for that. So this also explains why we pursue what we know. So if we see patterns in our parents' behavior growing up or patterns in each parent, we're going to pursue what we know because this part of the brain is making these associations and making it comfortable for us to pursue something that kind of keeps us in our comfort zone. So now I want to share with you a little bit about what this looks like when we're in a romantic love situation, how the limbic system is working when we are falling in love or in a romantic situation. And think about this in terms of being in a romantic love relationship with someone that has a personality disorder that you don't know yet has a personality disorder. And so I'm going to be taking this information from a couple of different Harvard studies. But basically, science shows that the primitive areas of the brain are definitely involved in romantic love. These areas of the brain light up on brain scans when someone is talking about a loved one. These areas can stay lit up for a long time for some couples. When we're falling in love, chemicals associated with the reward circuit flood our brain, producing a variety of physical and emotional responses. So things like your racing heart, sweaty palms, flushed cheeks, feelings of passion and anxiety. Levels of the stress hormone cortisol increase during the initial phase of romantic love, marshaling our bodies to cope with the crisis, in parentheses, the crisis or the stress at hand. Remember, stress can be good stress and negative stress. As cortisol levels rise, the level of neurotransmitter serotonin become depleted. Low levels of serotonin precipitate what's described as intrusive, preoccupying thoughts, hopes, and terrors of early love. And this is from, again, an article, a Harvard article. So those are basically the obsessive compulsive behaviors associated with infatuation. That's what we're describing here. So being love struck also releases high levels of dopamine. And that's the chemical that affects that reward system, gets our internal reward system going. Dopamine activates the reward circuit, helping to make love a pleasurable experience similar to the euphoria associated with the use of cocaine or alcohol. Other chemicals at work during romantic love are oxytocin. they can be released during sex and heightened by skin-to-skin contact. Oxytocin deepens feelings of attachment and makes couples feel closer to one another. Oxytocin is known as the love hormone, and it provokes feelings of contentment, calmness, and security, and often associated with bonding. In addition to the positive feelings that romance brings, love also, and this is really important, deactivates some of those neural pathways responsible for negative emotions such as fear and social judgment. These positive and negative feelings involve two neurological pathways. The one linked with positive emotions connects to the prefrontal cortex, while the other, which is linked with negative emotion, connects to the amygdala. So when we're engaged in romantic love, the neural machinery responsible for making critical assessments of other people, including assessments of those with whom we are romantically involved, it shuts down. So basically, this is where we get that statement that love is blind, because the brain turns off the amygdala basically, and we only see the good. What we see is the good in people. We don't see red flags. We don't see behaviors that might not be in the future, that might be sort of dangerous for us. So it's not our fault that we get into relationships with people, and then all of a sudden later they seem to become someone else. Part of what's happening, especially if you've been in a relationship with someone that's a narcissist, it's really two things. The narcissist is hiding those true their true self, and they're doing that. They're love bombing you, and they're hiding their true self because they want to um, get you involved in this relationship and help you feel attached. And the other thing that's happening is your brain, because you're falling in love, your brain is shutting down that amygdala, and it's kind of like all reason goes out the window. And anyway, so this is what's happening, and I think it's really important for us, so that we don't do the blame and the shaming of ourselves because we didn't see what was coming, or how could we not have known. This is why there is scientific evidence that shows this is what happens in our brains. The other piece that's really important to reiterate here is that, remember, the hormones that are acting like drugs and alcohol and giving this pleasurable experience, well, those are the same hormones that are going to keep drawing you back to the relationship. So it's like, even though the relationship is bad for you, it is like a drug that you keep getting drawn back to. And you tend to have this selective memory as well about how the relationship might have been good in the beginning. And you recall all those good things, and then your brain has forgotten all the negative things, because remember, it shut all that down because it was in love. So while the limbic system is smart, it's also primitive, and it is focused on survival and keeping you alive. So it's not always necessarily making or reinforcing the best decisions for you. It's in the business of getting what it needs in that moment that makes it feel good. And that's not what's going to make you feel good long term. So I wanted you to have this information, and you can read all about it. You could Google the brain and read all about this, but it's good to know and understand the parts of the brain and what's happening on this level, again, so that you are not blaming yourself, and also to understand, because here's the good news, that you can override all of this. And this is where faith comes in. There are lots of articles out there now that support the fact that when we are engaged in prayer, worship, meditation, and I'm not talking about hoodoo meditation. I'm talking about meditation with God, like sitting with God and thinking about Him. I'm not saying meditation's bad, but I'm specifically talking about meditation with the Lord. The parts of our brain that light up include all of these parts that we just talked about in the limbic system, and also the frontal part of our brain. So faith, when we're engaged in being faithful and sitting with the Lord, all these parts of our brain are lighting up. And so that's the piece that's important, because it's going to help us override some of these things that we've been relying on in the limbic part of the brain. Faith can override that. And we know from science that we can create new neuropathways in our brain. And we're going to do that through faith instead of fear, which involves fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses. And so, in the next at least 5 lessons, we're going to be going through very specific ways of doing this, and it's going to go back to the word faith, the acronym FAITH. And so, we're going to be talking about your focus and actions, and go through that acronym. But basically, throughout this entire course, you have been putting into practice all of the things we're getting ready to go over in the next 5 lessons. You've already been doing that. I'm just putting a name to it in the next few lessons, but you have been doing these practical exercises that have all been rewiring your brain and creating new neuropathways. So that's the good news. Now you just have some fundamental understanding, if you didn't already, of how the brain worked and how the brain was working in your relationship with someone that has a personality disorder. Now, I know I spoke a lot in this video about a relationship with a romantic partner. This is still true if the person that has the personality disorder is not a romantic partner, if they are a parent or another family member. Because especially if they're a parent and you're the child, you're looking to be obedient to your parent. We're told to be obedient to our parents. So we have these notions. Our brain is telling us that we need to be listening to our parent and being obedient to our parent, and we need to love our parent. So these things are still applicable even if it's not in a romantic relationship. The brain is still operating from a place where it's been conditioned to think a certain way about a family member, for example. Okay, well, I look forward to seeing you in the next few lessons.